The quiet ache of disconnection, a subtle hollowness that can creep in even when surrounded by people. It's the feeling of being adrift in a sea of faces with no anchor to truly pull you in. Many of us experience this longing for something more, a deeper sense of belonging that seems just out of reach. It's a feeling that whispers doubts into our ears, suggesting we're somehow flawed, incomplete. Consider the wise old Zen parable of the monk who sought his deepest peace not in crowded temples or bustling towns, but high up in the silent, snow-capped mountains. Most might see his solitude as a sign of isolation, a testament to his inability to connect. But within that stillness, he discovered a profound wholeness, a connection so vast it encompassed the world. This teaching gently invites us to question our ingrained fears, to see that solitude isn't an emptiness to be dreaded, but a fullness waiting to be embraced. It can be the quiet gateway to a clarity we've never known, and a connection that reaches far beyond what we currently imagine, touching all beings. And before we dive deeper into these teachings, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Wisdom like this is easy to miss in the noise of life, but if this video found you, it was meant to. Now let's keep going. It's a familiar knot in the stomach, isn't it? That quiet despair that settles in when the phone stops ringing, when the invitations cease, when you find yourself alone with your thoughts. The world tells us that connection is validation, that being seen and desired is proof of our worth. So, when that external mirror reflects back emptiness, it's easy to conclude that something is fundamentally wrong with us. We carry this idea like a burden, that loneliness is a direct indictment of our character, a sign that we are somehow broken, unlovable, or a failure at life. This feeling can be so pervasive, so deeply ingrained, that it colors our entire experience. We start to believe that others have it all figured out, that their lives are filled with effortless camaraderie while we're left perpetually on the outside, looking in. Every happy couple, every group of laughing friends feels like a painful reminder of what we lack. This internal narrative, fueled by societal pressures and our own evolving anxieties, can be a powerful source of suffering in itself. We fight against it, we try to fill the void with distractions, with constant activity, anything to escape the sting of our perceived inadequacy. But what if this perception, this deep-seated belief that loneliness means brokenness, is simply a story we've been told? What if this suffering isn't a symptom of our individual flaws, but a misunderstanding of a natural human experience? The Buddha, in his infinite compassion, saw that much of our pain stems from clinging to illusions, from resisting the true nature of reality. And perhaps, the most persistent illusion we grapple with is the idea that we are, or should be, fundamentally alone in a negative sense. We feel the absence of connection, and our minds immediately leap to judgment, to self-recrimination. Imagine the vast, silent ocean. It is immense, stretching endlessly in every direction. Does the ocean feel broken because it is vast and seemingly without shore? Or does its vastness hold a deep, inherent strength? We, too, are part of something so much larger than our individual selves. The feeling of loneliness, while intensely painful in our lived experience, doesn't necessarily signify a defect in our being. It might, instead, be a signal, a subtle nudge from the universe to examine the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we belong. If we could begin to peel back the layers of this societal conditioning, of our own fearful interpretations, we might start to see loneliness not as a mark of brokenness, but as a neutral phenomenon, much like the changing weather. It comes, it goes, it ebbs and flows. The suffering arises not from the feeling itself, but from our resistance to it, our insistence that it shouldn't be there, that its presence means something terrible about our soul. This is where the Buddha's teachings offer a radical shift in perspective, inviting us to look at these deeply felt experiences not as judgments, but as opportunities for profound awakening. This shift in understanding is crucial because it frees us from the exhausting internal battle. If loneliness doesn't mean you're broken, then you're not fighting against an inherent flaw. You're simply navigating a feeling, a common thread in the human tapestry that, when understood correctly, can lead to a deeper self-discovery and an unexpected connection to the world. But this initial reframing is just the first step. If loneliness isn't proof of a broken self, then what does it mean to be surrounded by others and still feel a profound emptiness? In the next section, we'll explore why being physically surrounded by people can paradoxically deepen this modern sense of isolation. There are days when the world feels like a vibrant, interconnected tapestry, and then there are days when you can be in the busiest room, surrounded by laughter and conversation, and feel utterly invisible. It's a peculiar kind of ache, isn't it? You're present physically, but a chasm seems to separate you from everyone else. You see the easy camaraderie, the shared glances, the inside jokes, and a familiar wave of disconnect washes over you. This isn't the sharp sting of true solitude. This is the hollow echo of being present but not connected. This experience highlights a profound truth that often eludes us. Physical proximity doesn't equate to relational depth. We are conditioned to believe that being amidst a crowd is a cure for loneliness, that the sheer volume of human presence should somehow fill the void. Yet, for so many, it only amplifies it. The more people there are, the more keenly we feel our own internal isolation. It's like being in a bustling marketplace, surrounded by countless vendors and customers, yet feeling entirely unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged in your deepest self. This is where the Buddhist perspective offers a gentle, yet powerful revelation. The suffering we experience in these moments isn't caused by the absence of people. It's caused by our clinging to a certain kind of connection, a connection that is often superficial, transactional, or based on external validation. We crave to be seen, to be understood, to feel a genuine resonance with others. When that resonance is absent, even in a throng, the feeling of loneliness can become more acute than being truly alone. It's the difference between wanting a glass of water and being offered a feast you cannot taste. Consider the mind's activity in such situations. While your body is present, your mind might be replaying past rejections, projecting future anxieties, or simply observing the perceived ease of others with a pang of envy. This internal landscape, often a whirlwind of thought and emotion, creates its own form of isolation. Even if someone were to reach out, to offer a kind word, your internal noise might prevent you from truly receiving it. You remain locked within the fortress of your own mind, even when the gates of the physical world are wide open. This paradox of being surrounded, yet feeling alone, is not a sign that you are failing at social interaction. It is, instead, an invitation to examine the nature of connection itself. Are we seeking a genuine exchange, a meeting of hearts and minds, or are we simply looking for external validation to soothe an inner unease? The Buddha taught that all our suffering arises from attachment, and in this scenario, it's our attachment to the idea of connection, to the external definition of being not alone, that causes the pain. If we are attached to being part of a vibrant social scene, its perceived absence, even when surrounded by people, will inevitably lead to disappointment. The stillness of true solitude, when embraced, paradoxically offers more potential for genuine connection than a crowded room filled with superficial interactions. In solitude, there are no external distractions to mask the inner landscape. The feelings that arise are unfiltered, and it is in facing these unfiltered feelings that we can begin to understand what it is we truly crave. But if all this suggests that surface-level interactions are meaningless, what happens when our deepest human impulse, the desire to be noticed and appreciated, becomes a source of our own suffering? The human heart yearns to be recognized, to be seen for who we truly are. It's a primal instinct woven into the very fabric of our being. We want our efforts acknowledged, our unique qualities appreciated, our presence felt. This desire to be seen can feel noble, a pure expression of our need for belonging. But when we look closer, through the clear lens of Buddhist wisdom, we may begin to notice a subtle trap, a shadow that follows this longing. What happens when this desire to be seen becomes a prerequisite for our sense of worth. When our happiness hinges on the applause, the nods of approval, the appreciative glances of others. This is where the desire to be seen transforms from a gentle yearning into a powerful form of attachment. We become dependent on external validation, our self-esteem ebbing and flowing with the perceived attention we receive. The world becomes a stage, and we are constantly performing, hoping to earn a favorable review. This attachment to being seen not only fuels our insecurity, but also creates a barrier to genuine connection. If we are constantly worried about how we are perceived, how we are coming across, our interactions become performances rather than authentic exchanges. We may censor our true thoughts and feelings, wear masks to fit expectations, and shy away from vulnerability, all for fear that the real us might not be enough to warrant being seen. This creates a subtle but profound disconnect, even in our closest relationships. We are seen, perhaps, but not truly known. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering. When we attach ourselves to the outcome of being seen, we create the conditions for disappointment. If we are seen favorably, we experience fleeting pleasure, which inevitably fades, prompting us to seek the next validation. If we are not seen, or if we perceive ourselves as overlooked, we experience pain, anxiety, and a deepening sense of loneliness. Our emotional well-being becomes held hostage by the opinions and perceptions of others. Consider the quiet moments of your day. Are you able to simply be without needing an external witness? Can you find contentment in your own company, in the simple act of existing without a chorus of approval? This is not to say that appreciation is bad or that recognition is to be avoided. It is to question the intensity of our need for it and the extent to which it dictates our sense of self. If the desire to be seen becomes an urgent hunger, it is no longer a desire for connection, but a desperate attempt to fill an inner emptiness with external affirmation. This attachment to being seen often masks a deeper, unacknowledged feeling of not being enough. We believe that if others see our true selves and still choose to value us, then we might finally feel complete. But this is a redirection of energy. True completion can only arise from within, not from the fickle gaze of the outside world. True worth is not bestowed, it is recognized from the inside out. So the next time you find yourself craving to be seen, to be noticed, to have your presence acknowledged, pause for a moment. Ask yourself what you are truly seeking. Is it external validation, or is it an inner sense of belonging? And if this craving for external approval is rooted in a deeper sense of not being seen by ourselves, what does it truly mean to discover that our fundamental nature is never alone? There's a myth that often takes hold in our modern world, the myth of the isolated self. We are taught to see ourselves as distinct individuals, contained within our own skin, separate from the rest of humanity and the natural world. This sense of being a singular island, with only tenuous bridges to others, is a powerful illusion. And it's this illusion that fuels so much of our fear, our anxiety, and especially our profound sense of existential loneliness. But what if this perceived separateness is not the fundamental truth of who we are? What if, beneath the layers of our individual identities, our unique experiences, and our personal histories, there lies a deeper reality? The Buddha's teachings point towards this very truth, that our true nature, our essential being, is never truly alone. This isn't to deny our individuality, but to suggest that our individuality arises from and is sustained by a much vaster interconnectedness. Think of a wave in the ocean. The wave appears as a distinct entity. It has a shape, a crest, a movement. It seems separate from the water around it. But is the wave truly separate from the ocean? Is it made of something other than water? No. The wave is simply a manifestation of the ocean's energy, a temporary form that arises from and eventually dissolves back into the vastness of the water. We, too, are like waves in the immense ocean of existence. This interconnectedness is not just a poetic metaphor, it's a tangible reality. Every breath you take connects you to the air, which connects you to the trees, which connect you to the soil, which connects you to the entire planet and its history. Every thought you have, every emotion you feel, arises from a complex web of biological processes, past experiences, and social influences. You are not an isolated atom. You are a nexus of myriad influences, a vibrant node in a cosmic network. When we feel lonely, it is often because we have lost sight of this intrinsic connection. We feel adrift because we have forgotten that we are part of the whole. The suffering of loneliness is the suffering that arises when we identify solely with the small, seemingly separate wave, and lose touch with the immensity of the ocean from which it arises. But the ocean is always there, even when the waves are small or turbulent. Your true nature, your essential being, is always connected. This realization can be incredibly liberating. It means that the emptiness you might feel is not a sign of being fundamentally flawed, but a signal that you have momentarily lost touch with this inherent belonging. It's like a sailor who forgets they are on a vast, interconnected sea and believes themselves to be lost in an empty void. The solution isn't to create a new, separate landmass, but to remember the ocean's presence. This truth doesn't erase our individual experiences or the intimacy we share with specific people. Instead, it deepens them. When we understand that we are fundamentally connected, our love for others becomes less about possessiveness and more about recognizing the same essential nature shining through them. Empathy becomes more natural, compassion flows more easily. Understanding that your true nature is never alone is a profound shift from a fearful, self-protective stance to one of open, inherent belonging. It's a recognition that the walls we build around ourselves are not only unnecessary, but also create the very isolation they are meant to prevent. But if this universal connection is our true nature, then why does the feeling of being alone persist so strongly, and how can we begin to actively engage with this truth? This is where we discover that solitude is not a prison, but a gateway. So often, we view solitude as a kind of punishment. It's the state we find ourselves in when relationships end, when social plans fall through, or when we simply feel unable to connect with others. In these moments, solitude can feel like a dark cell, a lonely prison from which we desperately yearn to escape. We see it as a negative space, an absence of something vital, like companionship or validation. This perception is not only common, but deeply ingrained in how we navigate our emotional lives. However, the wisdom traditions, particularly Buddhism, offer a radical reframe. They invite us to see solitude not as a prison, but as a gateway to what, you might ask, a gateway to deeper self-understanding, to unshakable inner peace, and paradoxically, to more authentic and profound connection with others. It's a shift from seeing solitude as an absence to recognizing it as a presence, a rich space waiting to be explored. Imagine a sculptor who wishes to create a masterpiece out of a block of uncarved marble. To do so, they must withdraw from the world, find a quiet studio, and focus their undivided attention on the stone. This period of intense, solitary focus is not a sign of their inability to engage with others. It is essential for their creative process. Similarly, periods of solitude offer us the essential space to sculpt our own inner selves, to chip away at the extraneous and reveal the true form beneath. In the hurried, noisy churn of daily life, it's easy to get lost in the currents of external demands and social expectations. Our thoughts are constantly pulled outwards, reacting to stimuli, conforming to norms, and seeking validation. Solitude provides the rare opportunity to turn the gaze inward. It's in the quiet spaciousness of being alone that we can finally hear the whispers of our own intuition, confront the patterns of our minds, and begin to understand the deeper currents of our hearts. This doesn't mean that solitude is always comfortable. The initial moments can indeed be challenging. Faced with the absence of external distractions, we may encounter our own anxieties, fears, and old wounds. It is precisely at this point, however, that solitude reveals its power as a gateway. Instead of running from these discomforts, we can learn to observe them, with mindful awareness. This observation, this gentle witnessing, is what begins to dissolve their power over us. The prison walls start to crumble, revealing not an empty cell, but a vast, internal landscape ready for exploration. Furthermore, it is in solitude that we can cultivate a genuine self-reliance. When we are not dependent on others for our sense of well-being, for our entertainment, or for our sense of identity, we become more resilient. We learn to be our own companions, to find contentment within ourselves. This inner contentment is not selfish. It is the foundation upon which true, unburdened connection with others can be built. A person filled with inner peace has less need to extract validation from others and can therefore offer more genuine presence and support. The monk in the mountains did not retreat from life. He entered into a deeper conversation with it. His solitude was not an exile, but a chosen path, a path that led him to a profound understanding of himself and the world. If we can shift our perspective and see moments of solitude not as a sign of failed connection, but as an intentional practice, we can unlock immense personal growth. But this profound shift in seeing solitude as a gateway only truly flourishes when we understand the underlying nature of the feelings that arise during these times. If loneliness is not a sign of brokenness, and being surrounded doesn't guarantee connection, then where do these persistent feelings of isolation truly originate? It's in recognizing that loneliness is fundamentally a construct of the mind, not a reflection of our core being. We often talk about loneliness as if it were a physical ailment, a disease that afflicts us. We say, "I feel lonely," as if it's a tangible sensation we can point to. And indeed, the emotional pain it causes can be overwhelming, feeling as real as any physical ache. Yet the Buddhist understanding offers a crucial distinction. The experience of loneliness is often generated by the activity of the mind, not by a fundamental lack in our core being. Consider the vastness of the sky. The sky is always present, always immense. Clouds may drift across it, obscuring its clarity, casting shadows, and changing its appearance. But the clouds are not the sky itself. They are transient phenomena that pass through. Similarly, our true being, our essential nature, is vast and interconnected. The feeling of loneliness is like these passing clouds, obscuring our awareness of our intrinsic connection. When we say, "I am lonely," our minds are often weaving narratives. We are replaying past perceived slights, imagining future exclusions, or comparing our internal state to the imagined perfection of others. These are all mental constructs, stories generated by the thinking mind. The fear of being alone, the yearning for connection, these are powerful emotions, but they are emotions that our minds interpret, amplify, and often distort. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from our mistaken identification with our thoughts and emotions. We believe that our thoughts are us, that our feelings define us. So, when the mind generates the thought, "I am lonely," we immediately equate that thought with our identity. I am this loneliness. This is who I am. This identification is what gives the feeling its persistent power. It is the mind's insistence on fabricating a narrative of isolation that perpetuates the suffering. This doesn't diminish the pain of the experience. The emotional sting is real, and it's important to acknowledge that pain with kindness and compassion. However, recognizing that the source of the suffering is the mind's activity, its tendency to judge, to compare, to predict, and to create narratives gives us an avenue for release. If the loneliness is a product of the mind's interpretation, then we can begin to work with the mind itself. Imagine a mind that is constantly scanning for evidence of isolation. It will inevitably find it. If it's looking for connection, it might find that too. The mind, like a diligent but often misguided servant, brings us what we ask for or what it thinks we need based on our habitual patterns. If our dominant pattern is to focus on what we lack, our mind will present us with a constant stream of evidence for that lack. This is where mindfulness practice becomes so potent. Mindfulness is not about eradicating thoughts or emotions, but about observing them without judgment, without immediate identification. When the thought, "I am lonely," arises, a mindful observer can simply notice it. A thought of loneliness, there it is. The mind continues to churn, but we are no longer swept away by the current. We are on the shore, watching the river flow. Understanding that loneliness is of the mind is a profound step towards freedom. It means the suffering it causes is not an intrinsic part of our being, but a temporary state of mental activity that can be understood and ultimately transcended. It is the mind that builds the walls of separation, and it is the mind, when trained, that can begin to dismantle them. But if our loneliness is indeed a mental construct, a story the mind tells itself, then it implies that the persistent feeling of being separate must be an illusion. The mind actively creates this sense of me versus them. This illusion of separation, in turn, is the very engine that drives much of our suffering. So, how does this illusion manifest, and why is it so powerful? We walk through the world perceiving ourselves as distinct individuals. There's me here, and then there's everything else out there. This sense of being a separate self, an independent entity navigating a world filled with other separate entities, is incredibly strong. It's the bedrock of our daily experience, the lens through which we filter reality. But from a Buddhist perspective, this perceived separation is not only an illusion, but a primary source of our suffering. Think about it. If you truly were a completely isolated unit, then any perceived threat to you, whether it's physical danger, emotional rejection, or material loss, would be a direct attack on your very existence. This inherent vulnerability, born from the belief in separateness, breeds fear. We fear losing what we have, we fear being hurt by others, we fear the eventual dissolution of our individual form, death itself. This pervasive fear is the fertile ground upon which much of our suffering grows. The illusion of separation also fuels our desire for what we lack and our aversion to what we perceive as unpleasant. Because I am separate, I need things that are not me to feel complete or safe. This leads to craving, to attachment. Conversely, things that are perceived as other and unpleasant must be pushed away, avoided, or fought against, leading to aversion and conflict. This constant push and pull, this striving for pleasing outcomes and avoidance of displeasing ones, is a hallmark of the suffering that accompanies the belief in a separate self. When we feel lonely, it is the illusion of separation that makes the experience so painful. We feel like an isolated island, and the vast, impersonal ocean of existence feels threatening and indifferent. If we truly understood our inherent interconnectedness, the feeling of loneliness might be experienced more like a momentary discomfort, passing through our awareness, rather than a crushing weight that defines our entire existence. The suffering arises from the belief that we are truly alone, cut off from all support, all belonging. This illusory self, this ego, is like a protective shell. It's built to shield us, but in doing so, it also imprisons us. It convinces us that we are in constant competition, that resources are scarce, that others are potential rivals. This mindset creates stress, anxiety, and a sense of never quite having enough, be it possessions, recognition, or love. We hoard, we compare, we strive endlessly, all to protect this fragile, separate self that we mistakenly believe is our true identity. The Buddha's path is, in many ways, a path of dismantling this illusion. It's not about destroying individuality, but about seeing through the rigid boundaries of the separate self. It's about recognizing that the essence of our being is not a solitary island, but a part of the continent, inextricably linked to everything else. By softening these boundaries, by loosening our grip on this idea of a fixed, independent me, we can begin to dissolve the very conditions that give rise to so much of our suffering. When we are caught in the grip of this illusion, even our positive experiences can be tainted. We might enjoy a moment of happiness, but the separate self will quickly label it as mine, and then fear its inevitable loss. This possessiveness, this clinging, turns even moments of joy into potential seeds of future suffering. The constant vigilance required to protect this separate self is exhausting. So this illusion of separation is not a minor point. It is the root from which many of our psychological and emotional difficulties sprout. But if this illusion causes so much pain, and if clinging to relationships is often an attempt to escape this feeling of separation, what does that reveal about the nature of our attachments? Understanding this can lead us to see that even our closest bonds can inadvertently reinforce this very illusion. We often seek relationships as an antidote to loneliness, a way to feel less alone in the world. And indeed, loving connections can bring immense joy, support, and a deep sense of belonging. Yet, a subtle danger lurks within the human heart, the tendency to cling to these very relationships, not out of pure love, but out of a desperate need to escape the uncomfortable feelings of isolation and emptiness. When we cling to a relationship, it means our sense of self, our well-being, and our happiness become heavily dependent on the presence and approval of another person. This isn't healthy interdependence. It's a form of emotional reliance that can be stifling and ultimately unsustainable. We use the other person, whether consciously or unconsciously, as a shield against our own internal discomfort. Their presence becomes our anesthetic, their affection our validation. This clinging is rooted in the illusion of separation we just discussed. Because we believe we are fundamentally alone and incomplete, we look to others to fill that perceived void. We might fear losing the person, not necessarily because we don't love them, but because their absence would bring us face to face with the very emptiness we've been trying so hard to avoid. The relationship becomes an escape route from confronting our own inner landscape. Think of it like trying to secure a sinking boat by tying it even tighter to a faulty buoy. The buoy might keep the boat from drifting too far, but it doesn't fix the leak. In the same way, clinging to a relationship to escape inner turmoil might provide temporary relief, but it doesn't address the underlying issues of self-worth or the fear of emptiness. The pressure to maintain this dependent connection can strain the relationship, leading to anxiety, jealousy, and unmet expectations. The Buddha taught that all suffering arises from attachment, and clinging to relationships is a prime example. We become attached to the idea of the relationship, to the comfort it provides, to the identity it gives us, rather than to the person themselves. This attachment creates an expectation that the relationship will always be there, will always provide what we need, and will always shield us from pain. When reality inevitably shifts, as it always does, this clinging leads to profound disappointment and suffering. Genuine connection, on the other hand, arises from presence and acceptance, not from dependence. It's about two whole individuals choosing to share their lives, offering support and love not as a crutch, but as an enrichment. It's a connection that allows for individual growth, for periods of personal space, and for the honest acknowledgement of each other's imperfections. This kind of connection is resilient because it's not built on the fragile foundation of escape. The desire to escape the discomfort of our own internal experience is a powerful driver of human behavior. We seek distractions, we chase fleeting pleasures, and we latch onto relationships with an intensity that can be overwhelming. This is where the path of mindfulness and self-awareness becomes crucial. It's about developing the courage to face our inner world, to acknowledge the feelings of emptiness or loneliness without immediately seeking to banish them through external means. If clinging to relationships is merely an escape, what does it mean for the restless mind that is constantly seeking these escapes? What is the mind doing that creates these feelings of void in the first place? Recognizing that our relationships are often a form of escape is a difficult truth, but it paves the way for a more authentic way of engaging with others and, more importantly, with ourselves. This leads us to explore the internal dynamics that create this yearning for escape, the restless mind. Have you ever noticed how, the moment you stop actively doing something, the thoughts begin to swirl? No matter how busy you are, how consumed by tasks or conversations, there always comes a moment of pause. And in that pause, if you're not careful, a familiar feeling can arise. A sense of emptiness, a quiet unease, a subtle ache of loneliness. This is the restless mind at work, creating a void where there might otherwise be peace. The mind, by its very nature, is a dynamic, thinking organ. It's designed to process information, to solve problems, to plan for the future, and to recall the past. This is a remarkable capacity. However, when this capacity becomes unchecked, when the mind is left to its own devices without mindful guidance, it can become a relentless engine of anxiety and discontent. It feeds on uncertainty, amplifies worries, and constantly seeks external stimuli to occupy its ceaseless activity. This activity is what often creates the feeling of a void. If the mind is constantly seeking something to do, something to think about, something to grasp, it can perceive the absence of these things as an emptiness. It interprets silence as lack, stillness as a void. This is why many people feel uncomfortable with true quietude. Their minds are not accustomed to it, and the sudden absence of mental chatter can feel disorienting, even frightening. Imagine a hamster on a wheel. It's running, it's moving, it's expending energy, but it's not going anywhere. The restless mind can be much the same. It churns and churns, generating thoughts and worries, anxieties and desires, but it rarely finds lasting satisfaction. This constant mental activity, this inability to simply be, creates a kind of internal friction. It's this friction, this lack of inner peace, that we often misinterpret as loneliness or emptiness in our lives. The mind, in its restlessness, is also a master storyteller. It weaves narratives to explain away discomfort, and often the story it tells is one of isolation. No one understands me, I'm not good enough, I'll always be alone. These are the tales spun by a restless mind trying to make sense of its own internal turbulence. The void isn't necessarily out there. It's the space created by the mind's inability to find contentment within itself. This is where the teaching of mindfulness comes into play, not as a way to stop thinking, but as a way to change our relationship with our thoughts. Mindfulness teaches us to observe the restless mind without becoming entangled in its stories. We learn to see the thoughts as just thoughts, passing clouds in the vast sky of our awareness. When we can do this, the mind's restless activity loses its power to create a sense of void. The more we practice observing our thoughts without judgment, the more we begin to notice that the mind is not a solid, unchanging entity. It is fluid, dynamic, and its restlessness is not a sign of brokenness, but simply its nature when untrained. By gently guiding the mind back to the present moment, to the breath, to the sensations in our body, we can begin to quiet the churning and experience the space that exists beneath the mental noise. This space, this quietude that the restless mind tries to fill, is not an absence of being. It's actually the very ground of our true nature, the place where peace resides. When we stop letting the mind create its own voids, we begin to discover a profound sense of fullness that is independent of external circumstances. So, if the mind is creating these voids through its restless activity, this suggests that the feeling of loneliness is not an inherent state of being, but a consequence of our mental habits. This understanding can be incredibly empowering. It means we have the capacity to change this experience. But where does this feeling of lack or void truly emanate from, and how can it serve as a guide rather than a torment? This is where we see loneliness as a compass. For so long, we've treated loneliness as an enemy, something to be vanquished, avoided, or medicated away. When that familiar ache settles in, our instinct is to reach for external solutions. A phone call, a social gathering, a new distraction. We see loneliness as a symptom of something wrong, a sign that we are failing at life, or that our circumstances are somehow inadequate. We try to fill the void from the outside, desperately seeking to patch up a hole that we believe exists in our existence. But what if this pervasive feeling, this often painful sensation, is not an enemy at all? What if it is, in fact, a wise messenger, a compass pointing us towards a direction we desperately need to explore? The Buddhist teachings encourage us to reframe our understanding of suffering, to see it not as a punishment, but as a guidepost. And loneliness, in its most profound sense, can be an invaluable guide. When loneliness arises, it is a signal. It's the universe tapping us on the shoulder, gently nudging us to look inward. It's an invitation to turn away from the frantic search for external validation, for completion in others, and to instead explore the vast, often uncharted territory within ourselves. The ache of loneliness is often the ache of disconnection from our own deeper being, from our own inherent wholeness. Think of it like this: if you're trying to find a hidden treasure and you're constantly searching the wrong places, digging up the same spots in the garden over and over, you'll never find it. Loneliness can be the signal that you're digging in the wrong places. It's telling you that the fulfillment you seek isn't out there in the approval of others or the acquisition of possessions, but within the landscape of your own consciousness. The mind, in its habitual patterns, often creates stories around loneliness. I'm not good enough. No one loves me. I'm destined to be alone. These are the interpretations that make loneliness painful. But if we can set aside these narratives for a moment and simply observe the raw feeling, we might begin to see that it's not pointing to a lack of external connection, but to a neglected inner connection. It's a yearning for self-acceptance, for inner peace, for a conscious relationship with ourselves. This is not to say that healthy relationships are not important. They are vital. But when our need for connection becomes a desperate attempt to escape our own inner state, it distorts the nature of those relationships. We become overly dependent, projecting our unmet needs onto others, hoping they will somehow complete us. Loneliness, when understood as a compass, helps us to realign. It teaches us that true completion comes from within, and that from this inner fullness, we can then build more authentic and sustainable connections with others. So the next time you feel that pang of loneliness, instead of resisting it or trying to distract yourself, try this: gently acknowledge it. Welcome it not as an enemy, but as a visitor. Ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to show me? Where is it pointing? It may feel uncomfortable at first, but by following its direction, you might just find that it's leading you to the most important discovery of all, the discovery of yourself. This understanding of loneliness as an internal signal is a crucial step. It shifts the focus from external problems to internal solutions. But if loneliness is a compass pointing inward, what is it that we are meant to find within ourselves? What is this inner state that we have lost touch with? This is where we encounter the profound truth that wholeness is not something we acquire, but something we remember. We spend so much of our lives searching. We search for love, for success, for happiness, for a sense of belonging. We often frame these quests as searching for something we lack, something that exists outside of us and that we need to acquire or attain to become complete. This is especially true when we grapple with feelings of loneliness or emptiness. We believe that connection or a specific relationship is what will finally make us whole. But the Buddha's teachings offer a different perspective, one that is both liberating and profoundly challenging. True wholeness is not something to be found, but something to be remembered. It's not an external prize to be won, but an inherent quality of our being that has been obscured by layers of conditioning, by fear, and by our ceaseless mental activity. Imagine a finely crafted necklace of pearls. The pearls themselves are beautiful and precious, each unique and radiant. But if the string that holds them together breaks, the pearls scatter. They are still pearls, still inherently valuable, but they appear disconnected, lost, and their beauty is diminished by their disarray. Our individual selves are like these pearls. We are inherently luminous, inherently valuable. But the string of our perceived separateness, our mental noise, and our identification with fleeting experiences can cause us to feel scattered and incomplete. Wholeness, then, is the recognition of that unbroken string, the understanding that our individual existence is intrinsically part of a larger, interconnected whole. It's the realization that the very things we search for outside ourselves, love, belonging, peace, are already present within the fabric of our being, if only we could see them clearly. The feeling of loneliness is often the aching awareness of this obscured wholeness, like a deep, subconscious memory of a connection we have forgotten. This remembering is not an intellectual process of gathering facts. It's a felt sense, an intuitive reawakening. It involves quieting the mind's constant chatter, the stories of not enough, and the relentless pursuit of external validation. It is in these moments of stillness, when the noise subsides, that we can begin to perceive the subtle, constant presence of our own inherent completeness. When we practice mindfulness, when we observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment, we are, in essence, practicing the art of remembering. We are noticing the passing of thoughts like clouds, watching the rise and fall of emotions without clinging to them. In this process, we begin to see that we are the sky, not the clouds. We are the ocean, not the individual waves. And in this recognition, the feeling of fragmented emptiness begins to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, unshakable sense of being already whole. This realization doesn't mean our individual lives cease to matter or that our unique experiences disappear. Rather, it enriches them. When we operate from a place of inherent wholeness, our interactions with the world change. We love and connect with others not because we need them to complete us, but because we are overflowing with a richness that desires to be shared. Our actions become less driven by fear and lack, and more by presence and generosity. The journey, then, is not to find wholeness out there, but to remember it here, now, within the awareness that you already are. The feelings of incompleteness and loneliness are temporary veils, obscuring a reality that has always been and will always be present. But if wholeness is something we remember, and if loneliness is an ache reflecting that lost connection, then how do we cultivate the inner state that allows this remembering to happen? This leads us to the practice of compassion, which begins not with grand gestures, but with a quiet inner stillness. We often think of compassion as an outward act, a generous gesture towards someone suffering, a charitable donation, a comforting word. These are all beautiful expressions of compassion, vital to a humane society. However, the deeper wisdom of Buddhism teaches that the wellspring of all true compassion is not found in external actions, but in inner stillness. When we are caught in the storm of our own restless thoughts and emotions, when we are buffeted by anxieties and the constant churn of mental narratives, it is incredibly difficult to genuinely connect with the suffering of others. Our own internal turmoil acts like a thick fog, obscuring our vision and preventing us from truly seeing and empathizing with those around us. We may want to help, but our own internal chaos makes genuine engagement almost impossible. Stillness in this context is not about suppressing our emotions or emptying our minds of all thought. Rather, it is about cultivating a stable, centered awareness. It's about learning to observe our own internal states without immediate judgment or reaction. When we can sit with our own discomfort, our own feelings of loneliness or frustration, with gentle acceptance, something profound begins to shift. We develop a capacity to bear our own pain, and this capacity is directly transferable to bearing the pain of others. Imagine a serene lake. On a calm day, its surface is like a mirror, perfectly reflecting the sky and the surrounding landscape. This mirror-like quality allows it to faithfully reflect all that is before it. A restless, turbulent lake, however, cannot provide a clear reflection. Its surface is constantly disturbed, distorting whatever it attempts to show. Our minds, when restless, are like the turbulent lake. They cannot accurately perceive or reflect the suffering of others. When we cultivate inner stillness through practices like meditation, we begin to untangle ourselves from our own self-centered preoccupations. We start to see that our personal struggles, while intensely felt, are not unique. We begin to recognize the shared humanity in our pain, the common threads that bind us all. This recognition is the seed of compassion. It's the dawning awareness that this suffering I feel, this is the suffering that others also experience. This inner stillness also allows us to approach others with a more open heart. When we are not driven by our own unmet needs or anxieties, we can be more present for others. We can listen with greater attention, respond with greater wisdom, and offer support that is truly helpful, rather than simply a projection of our own desires. True compassion arises from a place of unburdened presence, a state that can only be cultivated through inner quietude. The ache of loneliness that we often feel is, in a way, a call to this inner stillness. It's a sign that our internal world has become neglected. By turning inward, by finding moments of quiet within ourselves, we are not withdrawing from the world, but preparing ourselves to engage with it more effectively and with greater love. We are filling our own well so that we can offer its waters to others. This quietness is the fertile ground from which genuine empathy can grow. When we are still, we can hear the subtle cries for help that might otherwise be lost in our own internal noise. It's in this stillness that we begin to understand that our own suffering and the suffering of others are not separate issues, but interconnected parts of the human experience. But if all this points to a need for inner quietude, and if loneliness is what drives us to seek it, then what is it we are truly addressing when we feel this sense of isolation? Is it a genuine absence or something entirely different? It's the realization that our feeling of being alone is not a state of being empty. The words alone and empty often get used interchangeably, especially when we're discussing feelings of loneliness. We might feel alone and then immediately conclude that we must be empty. This conflation is deeply misleading and perpetuates the suffering associated with isolation. While related, these two states are fundamentally different, and understanding this distinction is key to transforming our experience of loneliness. To be alone simply means to be by oneself, without the presence of others. It is a description of a physical or social state. You can be alone in a beautiful, tranquil setting, surrounded by nature, and feel a sense of deep presence and fulfillment. The company of others is absent, but that does not necessitate a feeling of internal void. Historically, many great thinkers, artists, and spiritual seekers found profound insights and peace in their solitude. To be empty, however, suggests a lack, a void, a deficiency. It implies that something essential is missing. When we feel empty, it's a feeling of internal hollowness, a lack of substance or meaning. This emptiness is often what we fear when we feel alone, and it's this fear that makes loneliness so painful. We interpret the absence of others as evidence of our own internal lack. The Buddhist teachings point out that our true nature is not empty in a negative sense. In fact, it is often described as emptiness, shunyata, in a positive way, meaning free from inherent fixed self. It is unconditioned, boundless, and full of potential. The suffering comes when we mistake this inherent emptiness of a fixed self for a negative, soul-crushing void. We are not empty of something. We are empty of a fixed, self-contained identity, which is a liberating truth. When we feel lonely and interpret it as emptiness, we are essentially saying, because there is no one else here with me, there must be nothing of value within me. This is a flawed conclusion. The absence of external companionship does not create an internal void. Rather, it can create an opportunity to discover the richness that already exists within. Think of an empty room. The room itself is not a problem, it is a space. Whether that space feels welcoming or desolate depends on what we bring to it. If we enter the empty room with fear and a sense of lack, we will likely feel desolate. If we enter with curiosity and a sense of inner peace, we might appreciate the quiet potential of the space. Our inner world is the room, and our mental state is what determines whether that solitude feels like emptiness or a space for profound presence. The pain of loneliness often stems from our resistance to being alone. We fight against it, we try to fill it, we berate ourselves for experiencing it. This resistance, this struggle, is what creates the sense of emptiness. If we could simply accept the state of being alone without the accompanying narrative of lack, we might discover that it's not an empty state, but a full one, full of the possibility for self-discovery, peace, and a deeper connection to what is. So the next time you find yourself feeling alone, pause, notice the feeling. Is it truly emptiness, or is it simply the absence of external company? By distinguishing between being alone and feeling empty, we can begin to dismantle the mistaken beliefs that make loneliness so dreadful. But if we are not empty, and the pain of loneliness arises from a mistaken belief, then what is it that we are truly seeking when we desire connection? It's the realization that no external force can truly complete us. There's a pervasive narrative in our culture, a romantic ideal that suggests true happiness and fulfillment can only be achieved through finding the one. We spend years, sometimes our entire lives, searching for a partner, a soulmate, someone who will not only love us, but also complete us. This idea is so deeply ingrained that it can feel like an undeniable truth, a fundamental requirement for a meaningful life. But the persistent ache of loneliness, the very feeling we try to escape by seeking connection, often points to a deeper truth. No single person or external circumstance can truly complete us. This realization can be unsettling, even frightening, because it challenges deeply held beliefs about happiness and belonging. If no one else can fill that perceived void, then what are we left with? The desire to be completed by another arises from the core belief that we are inherently incomplete. We feel like a puzzle missing a crucial piece, and we desperately look for that piece in other people. We might attach ourselves to them, demand their constant presence, and expect them to meet all our emotional needs. This is an immense burden to place on any individual, and it is destined for disappointment. When we look for completion outside ourselves, we are essentially projecting our own unacknowledged wholeness onto someone else. We believe they possess something that we lack, and by connecting with them, we hope to absorb that missing quality. This is not true connection. It's a form of emotional dependency, a clinging that is often rooted in fear rather than love. The teachings of Buddhism illuminate this point by highlighting the concept of impermanence and the illusory nature of a fixed self. If everything changes, including ourselves and others, then any sense of completion derived from an external source is by definition temporary. Furthermore, if there is no fixed, independent self to begin with, then there is no intrinsic incompleteness to begin with. We are already whole, just like a vast ocean is whole, even though it contains countless individual waves. The pain of loneliness, when we feel it as a void that needs filling, is actually a call to recognize our own inherent completeness. It's an invitation to turn inward and discover the boundless love, peace, and belonging that already resides within us. This is not selfish. It is the foundation for genuine connection. When we are not trying to be completed by others, we can offer them our presence, our love, and our support from a place of abundance, not deficit. This doesn't mean we should abandon relationships or become hermits. It means we approach them from a position of inner fullness. We seek partnership, not completion. We offer love, not as a lifeline, but as an expression of our own overflowing heart. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. It frees us from the exhausting pursuit of external validation and empowers us to find our own source of peace and belonging. The journey towards recognizing our own inherent wholeness is a lifelong practice. It involves acknowledging our feelings of longing without acting on them impulsively and cultivating a deep, trusting relationship with ourselves. It's about understanding that the power to feel complete, to feel loved and belonging, resides not in another person, but within the very core of our being. But if no external person can complete us, and the feeling of loneliness is a yearning for something we already possess, then what is it that we are clinging to that prevents us from experiencing this inherent completeness? It's the self, the idea of a fixed, separate me, and the act of dropping this self is the key. The self, that persistent sense of being a separate, independent individual with a unique history, personality, and consciousness, is the cornerstone of our identity. We believe this I is real, that it is the true essence of who we are. And yet, this very concept, according to Buddhist wisdom, is the primary architect of our suffering and the relentless driver of our longing, including the longing born from loneliness. When we cling to the idea of a solid, defined self, we create boundaries. These boundaries, while providing a sense of structure, also become walls that separate us from others, from experiences, and even from different aspects of ourselves. This perceived separation breeds fear, fear of not being enough, fear of being hurt, fear of loss, and the pervasive fear of annihilation, that the self might cease to exist. It is from this fear that the longing for completion, for connection to fill the perceived void, arises. Dropping the self, therefore, is not about annihilation or self-destruction. It is about softening our grip on this rigid, illusory construct. It's about recognizing that this fixed I is not a solid entity, but a constantly changing collection of thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. When we see this, when we loosen our attachment to this idea of a permanent self, the intense need for external validation begins to subside. The longing for something outside to make us whole loses its urgency. Think of a sandcastle built on the beach. We spend time and effort shaping it, decorating it, feeling a sense of ownership and pride. We identify with this sandcastle, but the tide eventually comes in. The waves wash over it, and the sandcastle dissolves back into the beach. This is not a tragedy, it is the natural unfolding of impermanence. Our self is much like that sandcastle. Our attachment to it, our belief in its permanence and separateness, causes us to suffer when it inevitably changes or dissolves, which happens constantly at a subtler level. When we stop clinging to the self, the doors of perception begin to open. We can see the interconnectedness of all things more clearly. The suffering caused by the illusion of separation begins to fade. Loneliness, which was once a painful testament to our isolation, can transform into a quiet spaciousness, a feeling of being at peace with oneself. The longing for external completion quiets down, replaced by a contentment that arises from within. This doesn't mean we lose our individuality or uniqueness. Instead, our individuality becomes more fluid, more adaptable, and more in tune with the natural flow of life. It's like allowing the sandcastle to become part of the beach, enriching the whole without needing to maintain a rigid, separate form. We can still have preferences, make choices, and have unique experiences, but they are not driven by the desperate need to protect or aggrandize a fixed self. The practice of mindfulness is a powerful tool in this process. By observing our thoughts and feelings without identifying them as mine or me, we begin to see the impermanent, constructed nature of the self. We witness the arising and passing of mental phenomena, and gradually, our attachment to the idea of a solid, unchanging self weakens. So, the next time you feel a surge of longing, a pang of loneliness, or a deep desire for something more, consider the possibility that the self you are trying to protect or fulfill is the very thing creating the suffering. By gently loosening your grip on the idea of a fixed I, you may find that the longing itself begins to dissolve, revealing a quiet, unshakable peace. But what happens when this observation of our inner states is not just a passive witnessing, but an active engagement, when the mind starts to invent stories to explain our feelings? In the whirlwind of our daily lives, emotions can arise with such intensity that they feel like tidal waves, threatening to pull us under. Feelings of loneliness, anxiety, sadness, or anger can strike with little warning, and our immediate, habitual response is often to react. We lash out, we withdraw, we distract ourselves, or we get caught in a spiral of rumination. This reaction, however, is often where the real suffering begins. The Buddha taught the profound difference between observing and reacting. To observe is to witness with mindful awareness, to acknowledge what is happening without judgment or immediate engagement. It's like standing on the bank of a river and watching the water flow past. You see the currents, the debris, the changes in its surface, but you remain on solid ground. To react, on the other hand, is to jump into the river, to be swept away by its currents, to become entangled in its flow. When we experience a difficult emotion, like the sting of loneliness, our ingrained habit is to react. The thought might arise, "I'm so lonely, no one cares about me." Immediately, our mind jumps to conclusions, our body tenses up, and we might say something harsh, withdraw further, or become lost in a cycle of self-pity. This reaction amplifies the initial feeling, turning a transient emotion into prolonged suffering. Observing, however, offers a different path. When the feeling of loneliness arises, an observer can simply notice it. There is a feeling of loneliness present. They might also notice the accompanying thoughts, "My mind is telling me no one cares," and the physical sensations, perhaps a tightness in the chest or a hollowness in the stomach. By simply acknowledging these without judgment, we create space. This space is crucial. It breaks the automatic link between the feeling and our habitual response. This space allows us to see the impermanent nature of emotions. Just as the river's current eventually changes, emotions rise, crest, and eventually subside, especially when we don't feed them with our reactions. When we observe, we stop adding fuel to the fire. We allow the emotion to pass through us rather than getting stuck in it. This practice of mindful observation cultivates a profound sense of equanimity. We learn that we are not our emotions. Our emotions are guests that visit, and while some guests may be unwelcome, they do not define the house. By practicing observation, we develop the capacity to remain present and stable, even when faced with difficult internal experiences. This is not a passive surrender. It is an active engagement with reality, a courageous facing of our inner world. It requires patience and consistent practice, but the rewards are immense. A reduction in emotional reactivity, a greater sense of inner peace, and the ability to respond to life's challenges with wisdom rather than simply reacting out of habit. So, the next time a difficult feeling arises, before you react, try to observe. Notice it without judgment. Create that precious space. It is within that space that true freedom from suffering can begin to unfold. But even with the best intentions to observe, our minds are adept at creating narratives. What happens when these stories, these explanations for our feelings, cloud our ability to simply witness? The human mind is an extraordinary storyteller. It's constantly weaving narratives, creating explanations for our experiences, trying to make sense of the world and our place in it. This storytelling ability is what allows us to build civilizations, share complex ideas, and understand history. But when it comes to our emotional lives, especially feelings like loneliness, this constant need to explain can become a source of immense suffering. When the feeling of loneliness arises, our minds don't usually just sit with it. Instead, they leap into action, immediately trying to find a cause, a reason, a culprit. "I'm lonely because I'm not attractive enough," or "I'm lonely because my friends don't really like me," or "I'm lonely because I'm not successful enough." These are the stories the mind invents, creating a perceived causality that often exacerbates the original feeling. These stories are not neutral observations. They are interpretations, often colored by our past experiences, our insecurities, and our deeply held beliefs about ourselves and the world. They assign blame, create victims, and reinforce the idea of a permanent, flawed self who is the protagonist of this tragic tale. The story of loneliness becomes an identity, obscuring the reality of the present moment. The Buddhist perspective encourages us to recognize these mental narratives for what they are, not objective truths, but constructions of the mind. They are like clouds passing across the sky. They are not the sky itself. Our thoughts about loneliness are not the same as the raw feeling of loneliness. And the stories we tell ourselves about why we feel lonely are often pure fabrication, designed to create a sense of order or meaning, but ultimately doing more harm than good. When we identify with these stories, we become trapped. If the story is "no one loves me," then every interaction is filtered through that lens. Any sign of affection is dismissed as not good enough, superficial, or an anomaly. The story becomes self-fulfilling because we are no longer truly open to experiences. We are only looking for evidence that confirms our fabricated narrative. This is how the suffering deepens, how the void feels more real, and how the longing for external completion becomes more desperate. The practice of mindful observation, as discussed earlier, is our defense against this story-making. When a feeling arises, instead of asking, "Why am I feeling this?" or "What does this mean about me?" we ask instead, "What is actually present right now?" We notice the physical sensations, the actual thoughts, without immediately weaving them into a grand narrative. This allows us to see the feeling for what it is, a temporary state of being, rather than a definitive diagnosis of our existence. By disengaging from the mind's tendency to invent stories, we can begin to see that loneliness, in its raw form, is not inherently negative. It is the stories we attach to it that create the suffering. This is a challenging practice, as our minds are incredibly adept at creating these explanatory narratives. But if our minds create these stories, and these stories fuel our suffering, what happens when we stop trying to explain and instead embrace the full spectrum of experience, including the perceived emptiness? It's in recognizing that even the perceived emptiness is part of a larger, more inclusive reality. The spiritual path, particularly the Buddhist path, is often misunderstood as a quest for constant bliss, a perpetual state of positive emotions. We imagine that by following the teachings, we will shed all negativity, all discomfort, and live in a perpetual state of serene joy. But this is a common misconception. The path is not about avoiding or eradicating difficult experiences. It is about learning to embrace and integrate them. This means that the path includes everything: the moments of joy, the feelings of connection, the experiences of peace, but also the moments of loneliness, the pangs of sadness, the sensations of emptiness. To try and exclude these so-called negative states is to engage in a subtle form of resistance, which is itself a form of suffering. The true transformation comes not from pushing these experiences away, but from learning to meet them with wisdom and compassion. When we talk about emptiness in the context of Buddhism, it's important to understand that it doesn't mean a void of nothingness. It means emptiness of inherent, independent existence. Our feelings, our thoughts, our sense of self are all impermanent and interdependent. Recognizing this emptiness is not a cause for despair, but a source of liberation. It means we are not rigidly defined, not irrevocably broken, and not inherently alone. For many, the feeling of loneliness is a gateway to confronting what they perceive as emptiness within themselves. They fear that if they are alone, they will be confronted with a void, a lack of substance or meaning. But when we embark on the path and learn to observe these feelings without resistance, we start to see that this perceived emptiness is not a deficit. It is precisely this lack of a fixed, solid self that allows for connection, for change, and for the experience of universal belonging. Think of a canvas. A blank canvas might seem empty to some, but to an artist, it is full of potential. It is the space upon which a masterpiece can be created. Similarly, the perceived inner emptiness that arises when external connections fade can be seen not as a lack, but as the vast, open space where genuine self-understanding and true connection can emerge. It is the absence of clinging noise that allows us to hear the subtler truths of existence. When we try to force connection, when we desperately seek to fill every perceived void with external validation, we are essentially running away from the very space that invites spiritual growth. The path teaches us to be present with all that arises, not just the comfortable parts. It is in being present with the discomfort of loneliness, with the sensation of emptiness, that we can begin to understand our interconnectedness and our inherent wholeness. This acceptance of everything, including the seemingly empty spaces, is what allows for true healing and transformation. It's like a gardener who understands that a robust garden needs not just sunlight and water, but also periods of rest and even decay. Everything plays a role in the larger cycle of growth. So, if we accept that all experiences, even the difficult ones, are part of the path, then what does this imply about our attempts to force connection and the role of presence in genuine engagement? It means that true connection isn't something we can manufacture, but something that arises naturally when we are truly present. In our quest to alleviate loneliness and find a sense of belonging, we often fall into the trap of trying to force connections. We might overextend ourselves, constantly seeking approval, changing our personalities to fit in, or relentlessly pursuing others in the hope of forging a bond. We believe that if we try hard enough, if we are persistent enough, we can manufacture genuine connection. However, the wisdom of the path teaches us that connection cannot truly be forced. It is a natural unfolding that arises from a different, more potent quality, presence. You cannot make a flower bloom by pulling on its petals. You can only provide the right conditions, sunlight, water, good soil, and allow it to open in its own time. Similarly, you cannot force a genuine connection. You can only cultivate the conditions for it to arise through your own presence. Presence means being fully there. It means being attentive, open, and authentic in your interactions without agenda or desperate need. It means showing up as you are, not as you think you should be. When you are truly present, you create an environment where genuine connection has the space to form organically. It's about being genuinely interested in others, listening deeply, and sharing your own authentic self without the pressure of needing a particular outcome. The frantic energy of trying to force connection often creates an invisible barrier. People can sense desperation, neediness, and inauthenticity. This can be off-putting, pushing others away rather than drawing them in. When we are not present, we are often caught up in our own thoughts and anxieties. What will they think of me? Will they like me? Is this going to lead to something more? This internal preoccupation prevents us from truly seeing and connecting with the other person. Think about a conversation where one person is constantly checking their phone or their mind is clearly elsewhere. It's impossible to feel truly connected to someone who is not fully present. The same applies to our own interactions. When we are present, we are capable of deep listening, empathetic understanding, and authentic sharing. These are the elements that form the bedrock of genuine connection. The practice of mindfulness is fundamental to cultivating presence. By training our minds to return to the present moment, again and again, we learn to be less distracted by our internal narratives and anxieties. We become more attuned to what is happening right now, both within ourselves and with the person we are interacting with. This heightened awareness allows for more genuine and meaningful exchanges. So instead of focusing on the outcome, on trying to get a connection, shift your focus to the process. Focus on being present. Be genuinely interested. Listen deeply. Share your authentic self. Allow the connection to emerge naturally from that space of shared presence. It's a more patient approach, and it yields far more authentic and lasting relationships. True connection isn't manufactured. It blossoms from the soil of genuine presence and acceptance, both of ourselves and of others. But if we cannot force connection, and presence is the key, what happens when we apply this principle to the very foundation of our suffering, our resistance to what is? It's in letting go of that resistance that true peace can be found. The experience of loneliness or any other difficult emotion often feels like an insurmountable obstacle. We struggle against it, we try to push it away, we fight to make it disappear. This internal battle, this resistance to what is where the vast majority of our suffering originates. The Buddha taught that the cause of suffering is not the feeling itself, but our attachment to the idea that it shouldn't be there and our subsequent resistance to its presence. Imagine a person trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. The more they struggle, the more exhausted they become, and the less progress they make. They are expending tremendous energy battling a force they cannot entirely overcome. This is akin to how we often approach our challenging emotions. When loneliness arises, we resist its presence, we fight against the feeling, and in doing so, we create more suffering for ourselves. Suffering doesn't end by eradicating the difficult emotion. It ends when we stop resisting it. It ends when we learn to accept its presence, not as a permanent state, but as a transient experience passing through our awareness. This acceptance is not resignation. It is a profound form of engagement. It is choosing to see reality as it is, rather than as we wish it to be. When we stop resisting loneliness, we are no longer expending precious energy in an internal tug-of-war. We can then direct that energy towards spacious awareness, towards understanding the nature of the feeling, and towards cultivating inner peace. This doesn't mean the feeling instantly vanishes, but its power to cause deep suffering begins to diminish. The current can still be there, but we are no longer fighting against it. We are learning to navigate with it, or even to float with it. This practice of non-resistance is at the heart of mindfulness. It involves observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, without trying to change them, and without clinging to them. When loneliness arises, instead of asking, "Why am I feeling this? How can I make it stop?" we can inquire, "What is present right now? Where do I feel this in my body? What thoughts are accompanying it?" This shift from resistance to observation creates space. This space is where understanding dawns. It's where we begin to see that emotions are like weather patterns. They come and go. They are not permanent fixtures of our being. By ceasing our resistance, we allow these patterns to pass through us as they naturally would. The suffering is the sticky residue left behind by our struggle, not the initial experience itself. The path to ending suffering, therefore, becomes a path of letting go, of non-resistance, of radical acceptance. It's about recognizing that the fight against reality is what causes us pain. When we surrender this fight, when we allow ourselves to be present with whatever arises, even the discomfort of perceived emptiness or loneliness, we discover a deep well of resilience and peace that was always there, beneath the surface of our struggle. But if suffering ends where resistance ends, and if true peace arises from this surrender, then what is the ultimate nature of this peace we discover? It is not a peace achieved through acquiring something, but one that is revealed through a profound letting go. We often approach connection with a sense of need, a feeling that we are seeking something to fulfill a deficit. We look for someone to complete us, to validate us, to make us feel less alone. We bring our expectations, our hopes, and our anxieties into our interactions, hoping that this combination will somehow forge a real bond. But this approach, driven by a sense of lack, can often lead to disappointment and reinforce the very loneliness we are trying to escape. True connection, as understood through the lens of Buddhist wisdom, is remarkably simple. It does not require elaborate efforts, strategic maneuvering, or a desperate plea for attention. In fact, it requires nothing from us in the sense of needing to get something. Instead, it arises when we are able to offer our full, unburdened presence. When you are truly present, observing your own inner landscape with clarity and accepting yourself without condition, you create a space of authenticity. In this space, you don't need to pretend, to perform, or to strive for approval. You can simply be, and it is from this state of being, this quiet self-acceptance, that genuine connection can blossom. Think of it like a quiet pond. If you throw stones into the pond, you create ripples and turbulence, disturbing its surface. But if you approach the pond with stillness and respect, its surface remains smooth, allowing for a clear reflection. True connection is like that clear reflection. It arises when we approach each other not with the stones of our unmet needs and expectations, but with the calm stillness of our own inner peace. This means that the effort in connection is not about trying to manipulate or impress others, but about cultivating our own inner state. It's about seeing the inherent worth and interconnectedness in the other person, just as we are learning to see it in ourselves. It's about offering our attention, our empathy, and our genuine curiosity, not as a means to an end, but as an expression of our own innate capacity for love and belonging. When we approach connection with the mindset of "what can I gain?" or "how can this person make me feel better?", we are essentially trying to take from a space of scarcity. But when we approach with "what can I offer?", even if that offer is simply my full, non-judgmental presence, we are coming from a place of abundance. and it is from this abundance that authentic bonds are formed. This is why practices like mindfulness and self-compassion are so vital. They help us to fill our own inner well so that we can show up more fully and authentically in our interactions with others. When we are not desperately seeking something from others to complete ourselves, we can finally offer them the gift of our true presence, and in that mutual offering, true connection emerges effortlessly and naturally. Thus, the path to profound connection begins not with seeking others, but with finding stillness and acceptance within ourselves. It's a realization that shifts the focus from acquisition to offering, from need to presence. But if true connection arises from this state of inner sufficiency, what happens when we face the most persistent illusion of all, the idea that loneliness itself cannot survive the clarity of reality? We've explored how loneliness can feel like a deep, gaping void, a testament to our separateness and a source of profound suffering. We've seen how our minds invent stories to explain it, how we can get trapped in reacting rather than observing, and how the desire for connection often stems from an attempt to escape this discomfort. But what if the very nature of loneliness, as we typically understand it, is an illusion that cannot withstand a clear-eyed examination of reality? Reality, in its most fundamental sense, is characterized by impermanence and interdependence. Everything is constantly changing, arising and passing away. Nothing is fixed, nothing exists in isolation. When we feel lonely, we are often clinging to a false idea of permanence and separateness. We believe that the absence of current companionship signifies a permanent state of being alone, or that our individual existence is somehow disconnected from the vast web of life. When we bring ourselves fully to the present moment, with mindful awareness, we begin to see that this feeling of profound isolation is not a solid, objective truth. We see that our thoughts about loneliness are just thoughts passing through. We feel the physical sensations, but recognize their transient nature. We observe the external world, and if we look closely enough, we see the countless threads of connection that bind us to it. Consider the air you breathe. It is not yours in a possessive sense, yet it sustains you. It connects you to every living thing on the planet, to the trees, to the oceans, to the stars. The food you eat, the water you drink, the very ground beneath your feet, all are testament to an intricate web of interdependence. When we are truly present, this reality of connection becomes palpable, even in moments when we are physically alone. The illusion of loneliness thrives in the shadows of distraction and of a mind that is caught in its own narratives. When we are not paying attention to the present reality, we are easily swept away by the stories of our isolation. But reality, in its raw, unfiltered form, is a constant affirmation of our belonging. It is a continuous unfolding of interconnectedness. Therefore, the feeling of loneliness, when confronted with the clear light of reality, begins to dissolve. It cannot survive the simple, unadorned truth of our existence. It begins to lose its grip when we stop fighting against it and instead allow ourselves to simply be with what is, open to the profound interconnectedness that underlies all experience. This is not to say the feeling disappears instantly, but its power to define us, to cause deep suffering, is undermined when we anchor ourselves in the present reality. This confrontation with reality, with the impermanence and interdependence of all things, is what allows us to see beyond the fabricated self and its perceived isolation. It's a journey of stripping away the illusions that cloud our minds, leading us to a fundamental realization about who we truly are. But if loneliness cannot survive reality, and reality is characterized by constant change and a lack of fixed self, then what is the ultimate nature of this self that we believe is experiencing loneliness? The deepest layer of loneliness, the most persistent form of suffering, often stems from our profound identification with a fixed, unchanging sense of self. We believe we are a particular person with a specific set of traits, a personal history, and a unique destiny. We build our entire lives around this constructed identity, and when that identity feels threatened or when it feels disconnected, the pain can be immense. However, Buddhist teachings offer a radical, counterintuitive insight. You are not who you think you are. That solid, singular you that you hold so dear is, in fact, an illusion. It's a constantly changing, fluid phenomenon, a dynamic interplay of thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and external influences. Clinging to the idea of a permanent, separate self is like trying to hold onto water. The harder you grasp, the faster it slips through your fingers. When we truly investigate our experience, we can see this impermanence at play. The thoughts you had yesterday are not the thoughts you have today. The emotions you felt this morning have likely shifted. Your body is constantly regenerating its cells. Even your memories, while seemingly solid, can be reinterpreted and reshaped over time. So where is this fixed, unchanging self that you identify with so strongly? This realization is not meant to be nihilistic or to deny our individuality. It is to liberate us from suffering. When we believe we are a static entity, any perceived flaw or difficulty becomes a permanent indictment of our being. If I am lonely, and I believe that loneliness is a defining characteristic of my permanent self, then that loneliness feels insurmountable. But if I can see that lonely is a description of a temporary state, a passing thought or feeling, then it loses its power to define me. The suffering we experience, including the distress of loneliness, arises from our identification with this illusory self. We protect it, we defend it, we seek to enhance it. And when this self feels threatened or alone, we experience pain. By understanding that this self is not fixed, but fluid and interdependent, we loosen our grip. We begin to see that the I that feels lonely is not a fundamental aspect of our being, but a temporary construction. This leads to a profound sense of freedom. If you are not that fixed, solid self, then you are not irrevocably defined by your current circumstances or feelings. You are not inherently broken. This understanding paves the way for a deeper connection as it dissolves the boundaries of our perceived separateness. When the illusion of the solid self weakens, the walls of isolation crumble. The practice of mindful observation is the tool that allows us to see through this illusion. By diligently observing our thoughts, feelings, and sensations without identifying them as mine or me, we begin to notice the impermanent, constructed nature of our experience. We see that we are the space in which these phenomena arise and pass away, not the phenomena themselves. So, the next time you feel the sting of loneliness, remember this: the you that feels lonely is not the ultimate reality. It is a story, a construct, a temporary phenomenon. And in this realization lies the potential for profound peace and genuine belonging. But if the self we cling to is not real, and our experience is one of constant change, then what does it mean that nothing is actually missing at this very moment? In the flurry of our daily lives, it's so easy to get caught up in what we perceive as lacking. We focus on what's not happening, what we don't have, what we're not experiencing. When loneliness strikes, this sense of lack intensifies. The mind races, convincing us that something vital is missing: companionship, love, validation, a sense of belonging. We spend our energy chasing after these missing pieces, believing that once we find them, we will finally be complete and at peace. But Buddhist wisdom invites us to a radical pause, a moment of profound recognition. Nothing is missing in this moment. This statement is not about naive optimism or a denial of challenges. It is a direct invitation to examine our present experience with unflinching clarity, free from the illusions of past regrets and future anxieties. When we are fully present, truly inhabiting this very moment without the filter of our stories and desires, we can begin to see that all the elements necessary for our existence, for our well-being, are already here. The breath is flowing, sustaining us. The body, however imperfect, is functioning. The awareness that is experiencing this moment is present. The vast interconnectedness of life, unseen but always active, surrounds us. The feeling of missing something is not a reflection of objective reality. It is a projection of the mind, a narrative born from our attachments and aversions. We are attached to certain experiences and aversions to others, and this creates an imagined dissatisfaction with the present. When we cling to the idea of a desired future or a regretted past, we pull ourselves away from the fullness of the now. Consider a glass of water. If the glass appears empty, is it truly so? Or is it simply filled with air, which is essential for our very existence? Our experience of lack is often like this. We are so focused on what we think we should have, water, that we overlook what is already present and essential, air. In the same way, we are so focused on the absence of external connection that we overlook the presence of our own inherent awareness and the interconnectedness of all things. This moment right now contains everything that is necessary for you to be, to perceive, and to grow. It holds the potential for peace, for wisdom, and for resilience. The suffering arises when we reject this present reality, when we insist that it is inadequate, and when we chase after a phantom sense of completion that exists only in our imagination. By practicing mindfulness, we begin to see that the present moment is not a preparation for life. It is life itself. It is not a stepping stone to happiness. It is the ground upon which happiness can be realized. When we cease to believe that something is missing, we open ourselves to the profound abundance that is already here. This abundance is not in the form of external possessions or relationships, but in the intrinsic completeness of our own awareness. The realization that nothing is missing, that this moment is already whole, is a profound antidote to the longing that fuels loneliness and suffering. It shifts our perspective from a frantic search for external fulfillment to a quiet recognition of inner sufficiency. And from this understanding, we can move towards the final realization that the end of loneliness is not an external destination, but an internal shift. For so long, we've approached the issue of loneliness as if it were a problem to be solved in the external world. We've looked for cures in relationships, in social validation, in acquiring possessions, or in changing our circumstances, all with the hope of finding that elusive antidote to our inner ache. We've been searching out there, believing that the end of loneliness is a destination we will eventually reach, a place we will arrive at when the external conditions are just right. But the wisdom revealed through the Buddhist path offers a profound, game-changing perspective. The end of loneliness isn't out there. It's not something to be acquired, found, or achieved through external means. Instead, it is a shift in our inner landscape, a transformation in how we perceive ourselves and our relationship to the world. The end of loneliness is an internal awakening. This awakening comes from understanding that the suffering of loneliness is not caused by the absence of others, but by our own resistance to our inner experience and our mistaken belief in a separate, isolated self. It is our clinging to the idea of not being enough and our desperate search for external validation that perpetuates the pain. When we finally stop looking outside for what can only be found within, the illusion of profound isolation begins to dissolve. The journey that leads to this internal end of loneliness is one of self-discovery and self-acceptance. It involves turning the gaze inward with curiosity and compassion. It means recognizing that our inherent nature is not one of lack, but of boundless awareness and interconnectedness. It is about remembering our wholeness rather than trying to find it. When we cultivate presence, when we practice observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, when we accept the impermanence of all experiences, including the feeling of temporary isolation, we begin to dismantle the very architecture of loneliness. We realize that the void we feared is actually spaciousness, that emptiness is freedom from rigid identity, and that being alone is not the same as being fundamentally disconnected. The end of loneliness is not the achievement of constant companionship, though genuine, fulfilling relationships can certainly arise from this state. Rather, it is the realization that you are already inherently connected, inherently whole, and inherently worthy of love and belonging, exactly as you are in this very moment. It is the cessation of the internal struggle, the dropping of the resistance, and the embrace of reality as it is. This realization doesn't happen overnight. It's a path of practice, of gentle inquiry, and of repeated returning to the present moment. But every step taken inward, every moment of mindful awareness, moves us closer to understanding that the search is over. The peace we've been seeking, the belonging we've craved, was never out there to be found. It was always here, within the quiet awareness that you are. Make sure to subscribe for more Buddhist wisdom and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next teaching. Until then, stay present, stay peaceful, and we'll see you in the next one.